Welcome to Audit the Audit, where we sort out the who and what and the right and wrong of police interactions. This episode covers the Fourth Amendment, resisting, and mistaken identities, and is brought to us by Law and Crime Network's channel. Be sure to check out the description below and give them the credit that they deserve. Before we dive into the interaction, I want to give a big thanks to the sponsor of this episode, Rocket Money. Lately, I've been saving up for a nice Valentine's Day gift for my wife, so I've been trying to stay on top of my expenses, and Rocket Money has been a huge help. Rocket Money is the personal finance app that helps you cancel subscriptions, lower bills, and manage your money better. With Rocket Money, you can automatically monitor your spending by category, get notifications when you've exceeded them, and visualize your spend-to-earn ratio by month, quarter, or year. Rocket Money also helps negotiate your internet, phone, and cable bills, so you can pay less on services you already have. Just snap a picture of your bill and Rocket Money will take care of the rest. I use Rocket Money to help monitor my spending and build monthly and yearly budgets, and it's great for planning because you have all the information you need in one place. Rocket Money has helped save its customers an average of $720 a year with over $500 million in canceled subscriptions. You can try Rocket Money for free by heading to rocketmoney.com/audit or clicking my link in the description. To save more and spend less, join the over 5 million members by heading to rocketmoney.com/audit. Thanks again to Rocket Money for sponsoring today's episode. On October 16th, 2021, Officer Paul Guab and Officer Holly Harris of the Dallas Police Department pulled over single father Sylvester Hayes while he was driving to pick up breakfast for his children in Dallas, Texas. Despite the fact that Mr. Hayes spells his first name Silvester, the officers believe they have apprehended another man named Sylvester Hayes who spelled his first name Sylvester and was wanted for a family violence warrant.
Come on, step out with me. I'll explain it to you.
I didn't give you permission to do that.
I know. Step out. I'll explain everything.
No, sir. Tell me why. I didn't give you permission to open my door or none of that.
Right now, you are being detained. Come on and step out.
Hey, yeah, I was very
Come on and step out. Come on. Come on and step out. You're gonna get tased. Come on and step out.
You pulling out a tape?
Come on and step out. Come on and step out. Come on and step out.
Bro.
Step out.
What are y'all? Man, hold on, bro.
Come on and step out.
Come on and
step out. Come on and step out.
What are y'all?
Come on and step
Y'all
out.
pulling on me for what?
Come on and step out.
Hold on. Y'all, I didn't give y'all permission. Bro, hold on. Hey, bro, come get it. Bro, this is my gun. Bro, this is my, bro, my
Officer Guab reaches inside the driver's side window, unlocks and opens the door, and orders Mr. Hayes to step out of the vehicle because he is being detained. When Mr. Hayes refuses to step out, the officers begin to pull on him, and Mr. Hayes remains seated in the vehicle. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which has jurisdiction over Texas, has repeatedly held that the Fourth Amendment is implicated when a law enforcement officer reaches into a vehicle's interior space. For example, in the 1993 case of U.S. versus Riles, the Fifth Circuit concluded that a state trooper intruded inside a space that, under most circumstances, is protected by a legitimate expectation of privacy when he opened an individual's car door and stuck his head inside without a search warrant. More recently, the same court stated in the 2007 case of U.S. versus Meredith that, quote, opening a vehicle's door or piercing the interior airspace constitutes a search, and reasonable suspicion must exist prior to a search. Accordingly, a court would almost certainly determine that Officer Guab conducted a so-called search of Mr. Hayes' vehicle for purposes of the Fourth Amendment by reaching inside. Additionally, Section 38.03 of the Texas Penal Code states that an individual, quote, commits an offense if he intentionally prevents or obstructs a person he knows is a peace officer or a person acting in a peace officer's presence and at his direction from effecting an arrest, search, or transportation of the actor or another by using force against the peace officer or another. As we will discuss further later in this episode, while Mr. Hayes' mere refusal to exit the vehicle would not rise to the level of resisting under this statute, it is possible that a court could conclude that Mr. Hayes resisted the officers by pulling in the opposite direction in response to their attempts to remove him from the vehicle, although it is difficult to tell from the footage whether Mr. Hayes exerted any force to remain seated. Additionally, while Mr. Hayes did not appear to be under arrest at the time the officers attempted to remove him from the vehicle, it is possible a court could determine that Mr. Hayes obstructed the officers from transporting him. Further, Section 542.501 of the Texas Transportation Code states that, quote, a person may not willfully fail or refuse to comply with a lawful order or direction of a police officer. And in the 2023 case of Garcia versus Bermea, the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Texas concluded that a reasonable officer could have determined that there was probable cause to arrest an individual for a violating of this statute when he failed to comply with multiple lawful commands to exit his vehicle. Now, as we've discussed before on ATA, the Supreme Court has long held that officers may order individuals to exit their vehicles during a legitimate traffic stop without any additional suspicion being required. And as such, it is likely that a court would conclude the officers would have probable cause to arrest Mr. Hayes for refusing to step out of the vehicle if it found that the underlying stop was supported by at least reasonable suspicion of a traffic violation.
What am I being detained for, man? Stop. What am I being detained for?
If you let us tell you, we'll tell you. Shut up.
Tell me right now. What am I being detained for, man? No,
Stop.
Help! They hurting me! They hurting me!
84 out with us as well. And start us on record, please.
I don't know, felony.
Get in the car. You're getting this because you're acting this way. This is 100%, and I'm not your. I know I'm.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Because you're acting stupid.
Y'all don't even understand. Y'all in big trouble.
Go for it. I don't care.
Y'all in big trouble. You are under arrest.
After Mr. Hayes struggles against the officers' efforts to place him in the back seat of the vehicle, the officers put him in leg restraints and inform him that he is under arrest. Although it is unclear whether Mr. Hayes was under arrest when the officers originally attempted to place him in the police cruiser, his actions may have been sufficient to support a conviction for resisting under Section 38.03 of the Penal Code, which, as we discussed earlier in this episode, criminalizes intentionally preventing or obstructing a peace officer from, quote, effecting an arrest, search, or transportation of the actor or another by using force against the peace officer or another. In the 2014 case of Dobbs versus State, the Court of Criminal Appeals of Texas defined the phrase by using force against a peace officer or another as, quote, violence or physical aggression or an immediate threat thereof in the direction of and or into contact with or in opposition or hostility to a peace officer or another. Applying this definition in the 2016 case of Finley versus State, the same court affirmed a conviction for resisting against an individual who clenched up and pulled his arms away from arresting officers, ruling that this limited use of so-called force was sufficient to sustain a conviction. Accordingly, it is probable that a court would conclude that Mr. Hayes' actions in struggling against the officers' attempts to put him in the police cruiser constituted resisting. Likewise, it is important to note that whether a transportation or arrest is unlawful is irrelevant in determining whether an individual resisted under Texas law, as the resisting statute specifically states that, now quoting, it is no defense to prosecution under this section that the arrest or search was unlawful. Although the statute only mentions the lawfulness of an arrest or search, courts have also applied this clause to resisting transportation charges. For instance, in the 2008 case of Clement versus State, the Second District Court of Appeals of Texas affirmed a resisting conviction where the jury instructions stated that, quote, our law provides that a person commits the offense of resisting arrest if she intentionally prevents or obstructs a person she knows is a peace officer from effecting arrest or transport of such person or another person by using force against the peace officer. It is no defense that the arrest or transportation was unlawful. As such, even if a court determined that the transportation or arrest of Mr. Hayes was illegal, he could still be convicted for resisting. However, it should also be recognized that Section 9.31 of the Texas Penal Code states that, quote, the use of force to resist an arrest or search is justified if, before the actor offers any resistance, the peace officer uses or attempts to use greater force than necessary to make the arrest or search, and when and to the degree the actor reasonably believes the force is immediately necessary to protect himself against the peace officer's use or attempted use of greater force than necessary. Therefore, Mr. Hayes could potentially defend himself against a resisting charge by arguing that the officers were using greater force than necessary to arrest him.
All right, let's get him up.
All right.
Leg restraints are off. Ready? 1, 2, 3, up.
Y'all are in big trouble, man. Y'all are in big, I can't even get up, man. My fucking head. Damn, man. Do you see how they doing me?
Bro.
Do you see how they...
Scoot back. Scoot back. On your feet. You got the gun?
It's in his
Goes in
right
his
pocket.
right pocket.
And he kept going like this too. He kept reaching.
No, I did not.
After running Mr. Hayes' driver's license through the Dallas Police Department's database, Officer Harris seems to realize that they have arrested the wrong Sylvester Hayes. In the 1971 case of Hill versus California, the Supreme Court upheld the constitutionality of an arrest of an individual that officers mistook for another individual, despite the arrestee's protestations of mistaken identity and his provision of identification showing he was not the suspect the officers were seeking, concluding that, now quoting the court, when the police have probable cause to arrest one party, and when they reasonably mistake a second party for the first party, then the arrest of the second party is a valid arrest. The court noted that although the officers' quote-unquote subjective good faith belief that they had arrested the right suspect would not in itself justify the arrest, quote, when judged in accordance with the factual and practical considerations of everyday life on which reasonable and prudent men act, the arrest and subsequent search were reasonable and valid under the Fourth Amendment. Similarly, in the 2014 case of Hine versus North Carolina, the Supreme Court stated that, quote, to be reasonable is not to be perfect, and so the Fourth Amendment allows for some mistakes on the part of government officials, giving them fair leeway for enforcing the law in the community's protection. As such, the court also recognized that, now quoting again, searches and seizures based on mistakes of fact can be reasonable, and that, now quoting again, the limit is that the mistakes must be those of reasonable men. Although it may not seem particularly reasonable for the officers to assume that Mr. Hayes was the same Sylvester Hayes who was wanted on a family violence warrant without first checking the police database, particularly given the common nature of his first and last name in a city with a population as large as Dallas, courts have been generous in their interpretation of what constitutes a so-called reasonable mistake, as well as the steps officers should take to avoid them. For instance, in the 2020 case of Nerio versus Evans, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals found that officers who arrested an individual whom they mistook for his half-brother of the same name were entitled to qualified immunity. In reaching this conclusion, the court cited the 1979 case of Baker versus McCullen, in which the Supreme Court noted that the Constitution, now quoting, does not guarantee that only the guilty will be arrested, and that it does not require officials, now quoting again, to perform an error-free investigation of mistaken identity claims. In the McCullen case, the Supreme Court addressed the constitutionality of the arrest of an individual who was incorrectly identified as the person for whom the arrest warrant was issued. The court rejected the Fifth Circuit's holding that, quote, the sheriff or arresting officer has a duty to exercise due diligence in making sure that the person arrested and detained is actually the person sought under the warrant, and not merely someone of the same or a similar name, and ultimately concluded that, although there may be liability under state tort law for such an arrest, it did not constitute a constitutional violation. In the same vein, the Fifth Circuit found in the 1994 case of Blackwell versus Barton that a mistaken arrest was reasonable, despite the officer's failure to even confirm the identifying information on the arrestee's driver's license, because no inference could be drawn that the officer knew or believed he was or likely was arresting someone other than the suspect. Accordingly, while Mr. Hayes has a cognizable argument that the officers arresting him based solely on his similar name was an unreasonable mistake, given the broad leeway courts have given to officers when determining whether a mistake was quote-unquote reasonable, it will likely be challenging for him to prove that the officers violated the Constitution by arresting him.
I got 4 kids, man. I got 4 kids at the house, man.
Weston 380. Serial number is going to be.
That is my weapon. This is my name. That's my weapon. This is my name. Bro, y'all doing this for no reason, man.
I came in late for everything.
And they handled me so rough, sir. I didn't give nobody no attitude or anything, sir. Like they say I failed the signal at the stop sign.
The stop sign?
I mean, I was wrong for that. Look how they handled me, sir. I didn't do anything that deserved it.
There was a gun, right?
But I wasn't pulling. I told them I had a weapon. This is my name.
Okay.
If they run it, it's going to say Sylvester Hayes.
Okay. Mr. Hayes, there is another Sylvester Hayes, right? And that Sylvester Hayes does have a warrant.
I'm fighting for my life, man. I got 4 babies at the house, man. Like, I got a good job. I work security. I'm trying to be one of y'all, but like, come on, man. This how y'all do. This how y'all do me. I'm working to be y'all, bro.
I do apologize. Like, if you feel like they roughed you up or whatever, I do apologize.
So what did it say about the gun, sir? When y'all ran the serial number, what did it say?
When I ran it and you saw me run it, it came back clear. It's not stolen.
None of that, right?
Right.
If they had their radio on, I was complaining, man. If they had their camera on, I was complaining. They didn't even try to hear me, man.
Okay.
Got another magazine.
Start doing traffic. She's running plates.
Okay.
I'm like, hey, run that Hyundai, and it pops up red. She kind of looks at it, but by that time we had already lost him. As she's searching, the name that she put on there, whatever was on AIS, had continuous family violence, warrant. And he fails to signal within 100 feet from the stop sign. We obviously pulled him over.
So he got the reason for contact?
Yeah. I was just like, you have your ID with you. And so he gives it to me, and obviously I handed it over to her, and she's like, Sylvester Hayes, like that's the name that was under warrant. But
so you got a good warrant?
Well,
he does have tickets.
He does have the tickets. Bro,
so you got jail traffic, resisting arrest, right?
Yeah, we have failed to signal 100 feet. He had a gun in his pocket because he kept going like this.
That's why he was acting so crazy.
Is he a felon?
He has not been convicted. Or no felon?
No felon. But if he resisted, he resisted. You know
Yeah,
what I'm saying?
he just
so
resisted.
We got him on that, right?
Yeah.
So that we're good. So yeah. So just find out.
The Lester ended up being like the third or something like that. But as soon as I saw the Lester Hayes, I was like, okay, let's get him out while we investigate this.
After realizing that they had arrested the wrong Sylvester Hayes, the officers continued in their arrest of Mr. Hayes, and he was charged with resisting arrest and unlawful carrying of weapons, despite the officers' determination that his firearm was legal. On December 9th, 2022, approximately 14 months after the arrest, the prosecution dismissed both charges against Mr. Hayes. On October 16th, 2023, Mr. Hayes filed a lawsuit against the city of Dallas and all of the officers involved with the stop and arrest, alleging constitutional violations, including excessive force and false arrest. In the complaint, Mr. Hayes stated that he was held in jail for multiple days due to his arrest, which led to him losing his job as a security guard. Mr. Hayes also alleged that his termination from his job started a, now quoting, downward spiral that would continue to wreak havoc on his life for the next 14 months, as the pending criminal charges against him made him unemployable as a security guard. As a result, the complaint states that Mr. Hayes lost his home and was unable to provide for his 4 young children. As of the date of writing this episode, the lawsuit is still pending. Overall, the Dallas officers get an F for arresting Mr. Hayes without even checking if he was actually the suspect they were looking for, using unnecessary and demeaning force in executing the arrest, and pursuing firearm charges against Mr. Hayes despite determining that his firearm was legal. Although it is possible, or even likely, that a court would determine that the arrest of Mr. Hayes was constitutionally reasonable, it certainly was not quote-unquote reasonable under the ordinary meaning of the word, as the officers failed to determine that they had the right Sylvester Hayes in a city of over 1 million people before taking action. Since Mr. Hayes was complying with the traffic stop and voluntarily provided his driver's license, there was no reason that the officers could not confirm that Mr. Hayes was actually the suspect they were looking for before attempting to detain or arrest him. Had the officers taken this basic investigative step, they would have found that there were no warrants out for Mr. Hayes' arrest and sent him on his way after handling the underlying traffic issue. Instead, they chose to immediately escalate the situation by detaining Mr. Hayes, causing the encounter to spiral out of control. This interaction demonstrates the sometimes substantial gap between the constitutional requirements placed on officers and the standard of good police work that officers should be striving to achieve. Mr. Hayes gets a C+, because although he was clearly detained in a case of mistaken identity, he failed to comply with Officer Guab's order to exit the vehicle and physically resisted the officers on several occasions. Now, while Mr. Hayes could argue that he was acting in self-defense against excessive force by the officers for some of his resistance, his physical opposition to getting in the back of the police cruiser would likely not be justified by this defense, as the Texas statute only allows for self-defense when it is immediately necessary to protect an individual against a peace officer's use or attempted use of greater force than necessary. Although I empathize with Mr. Hayes' reluctance to comply with the officer's commands when they failed to answer his questions regarding what was going on, the law unfortunately does not require officers to provide this information to citizens, and instead expects citizens to follow orders to exit vehicles regardless of the officer's reasoning or communication. Likewise, Texas law does not recognize the right to resist an unlawful arrest, and while I do not necessarily agree with all of these standards, until the laws are changed, individuals put themselves in a better position when they simply comply with such orders, arrests, and detentions, and challenge the officer's actions later on in the courtroom. Let us know if there is an interaction or legal topic that you would like us to discuss in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to check out my second channel for even more police interaction content.